what if behind every idea you share, there is an opportunity for you to shine? Well, that's exactly what we are going to show you today. If this is your first time here, guys, it's amazing meeting you here. My name is Moriya Kassis. I'm the founder and general manager of Product League, and what we do is helping you to become the best product manager you can be. And thank you for joining us for this amazing session of storytelling on this Practical Wednesday session, the place where talented product managers like you get to learn all the tricks and the tips of the trade. Now, storytelling is the intentional design of story structure, attributes, and elements that create emotion, drive inclusion, and lead with empathy, especially in today's super content saturated digital market. And today, we guide you through the magical process of transforming your product story words into meaningful story words. We are going to cover what is and what is not storytelling. We are going to teach you how to design your brand story and how to become a story lord or a story lady. Now, I am not going to do it myself. Actually, there is a super interesting guest who is joining us, and I just can't wait to call into our virtual stage the lovely Miri Rodriguez. So happy to have you here with us today.
Moriya, it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on a Wednesday. It's Wisdom Wednesday. We're going to learn some wisdom today, right?
Exactly. It's going to be practical. It's going to be, valuable. And it's going to be everything you guys need to know in order to transform your stories into something people want to listen to and to engage with. Now, just so you guys know why I am so excited to have Miri here with us. So, Miri Rodriguez is a globally recognized storyteller, head of global internship product program at Microsoft, and the author of Brand Storytelling. She is a creative journalist. Yes, exactly this one. She's an active journalist and content strategist, evangelizing brand narrative and showcasing how thought leaders can leverage storytelling techniques for culture activation and influence in the digital age. Guys, it's not just about, making more money. It's about making the world a better place. Her social advocacy and philanthropic work, including volunteering to train social enterprise leaders in Southeast Asia, coaching students at Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship in the US, and mentoring men and women of all walks of life to build a personal brand with empathy, passion, and purpose. And I think that these days, with the crazy things that happen outside, this is way neater than any other time in history.
I agree. I think it's when I wrote about this, when I was learning this space, I had no idea what was going to happen. I don't think anybody had an idea what was going to happen in 2020, but it is most poignant today more than ever. Absolutely.
So true. Now, guys, Miri wants to get to know you. I want to get to know you. So please use our comments and chat
Yes.
to let us know who you are, where you're from, what are your storytelling challenges, right? You have the amazing opportunity of asking Miri Rodriguez all the questions you've got, all the things that are on your mind and heart when it comes to
Mhm.
storytelling. Miri, are you ready?
I'm ready. Are you ready? Is the question.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
Wonderful. I'm excited, and I love that you're saying make sure that we put those questions in the comments chat, because I really want this to be a dynamic session. I know there's a lot of questions around storytelling. I know I had them when I first started in this field. So there's a lot to unpack, and it's going to be concise, and we will allow some time as well in the end to get to those questions. So hopefully I'm just going to run through the content, make sure you get your practical tools, and then and see how you can apply them. So wear your storyteller hat and see how does this apply to me right now in my space and what I want to do. Because these concepts actually apply to not only your personal brand, but also your corporate brand, any space. It really is storytelling, a communication tool that you can employ anywhere. And it has served me personally in so many levels of relationships, not only at work, in my brand, in my family. So truly something to hone in today from many different ways.
That's so true. I can't wait to learn from you. And guys, please be active. Use the chat. It's more of workshop even than just to
Yeah,
talk, because Miri like to interact with our
I do.
audience. So please use this amazing opportunity, and Miri, the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. One of the things that for me has been really important to understand is what is storytelling. Starting just with that, because when I began this work, I didn't really know. I had an idea. I thought I had an idea, and truly, I was very wrong. I thought it was just telling stories. I also thought it was marketing in general, and I couldn't be any more wrong. It can be used for marketing as a tool. It certainly is not that. In fact, the deeper I got into this concept of telling stories for an emotional connection, for a connection at a human level, I understood that storytelling can activate culture. It actually has done that many years for us as a human race. And so we are taking these very cognitive abilities that we've always had. You are a storyteller, and really taking that and actually becoming a story lord or lady. I like what you said, Maria. And really taking it to the next level. How do we take these very intrinsic tools that we have been given, children speaking stories, we all do, and really take them to a space where we can leverage this to drive emotional connection with our stakeholders wherever they may be. It really is life changing. And for me, it's changed my life personally, also my business, also Microsoft. I mean, it's just so many different things that where we're able to employ these schemes, this alchemy, to transform worlds, and like I said, transform words into worlds. And so I learned through my journey that storytelling is not just telling stories, as you can see here. It is the intentional design. All of us have the ability to create and design what is best for our audiences. I also learned that, people have created some concepts around storytelling and some frameworks, and those may serve, but are those the best ones for your audience? I don't know. Maybe you don't know. The hero's journey is one of them. We hear a lot about that one. Somebody invented that, right? Somebody decided that was something good for their audience. Well, you have the capability and you should create your own storytelling framework. That's what storylording is. It's not just I'm going to go tell a story in a framework that somebody gave me. It's I'm going to design with what I believe serves my audience best. Because the reality is your customer is different than mine. Your stakeholder is different than mine. So your audience is different than mine. And my intention or my mission for a story will be different than yours as well. So what I want to show here is give you some practical tools that you can hone in and design your stories in the best way. Story lording is designing. That's exactly what it is. And so I'm just going to start with the basics of what is not storytelling, because as I said earlier, I was a little bit confused. I thought I knew. And then as I got deeper into this concept, I realized I didn't know a whole lot. And I learned that storytelling is not facts, information, data. It's not going on Instagram calling yourself a storyteller because you put stories on Instagram. Certainly, it's not just telling stories, right, in a format that you think it is. For me, when I began to do this work in the engineering space at Microsoft, I had to create very poignant stories, very niche stories to a very niche audience. And so I had to understand what that meant in my space. How was I going to become a story lord and understand that I can take a character, a plot, and a conclusion, which are the elements of story. In other words, if it doesn't have those three, it's not a story. But if you have those three, what do you do with that in a way that will actually land the best way? And when you add on what's happening today, when you add on the nuances of market, when you add on social injustice, when you add on a global pandemic, when you add on the fact that we're tired, right, emotionally, it's just so much going on. How do we effectively land our stories? How do we communicate in the best possible way, and drive that message in the best possible way? For me, storytelling then became a tool where we can transfer information, that information that is not storytelling, and transfer it through a character, plot, and conclusion in an emotional manner. So storytelling is an emotional transfer of information done through a character, plot, and conclusion. And when I understood this, I was like, okay, I get it. I get to transfer information, but I got to do it emotionally. And why emotionally? Because that's what drives us. Emotions do. That's what helps us act. That's how we buy, by the way. We don't buy logically. We buy products, we make those decisions emotionally, and then we actually rationalize them. We respond to emotion. We are driven by emotion. Even the person that you might be the most skeptical will actually act, will respond to, will engage with emotional content. That's what makes content go viral, by the way. That's why we love some movies and don't love some movies, because we connect with something emotionally in those movies that we love, that capture our attention. And so when I understood this, I was like, okay, great. How am I going to go do this, right? How do we do this? I get that it needs to be emotional. How do I do this in my space? Especially my space, which was very heavily technical. How can I get this information across a niche audience? I still land the content that needs to be without touching it, without diluting it, but still driving the message, but also being connected at the human level. I want to introduce design thinking as a model. It's something that I learned. I was taking my master's course, and while I was doing this work in engineering, and I didn't know how to go tell stories. I understood it needed to be emotional in essence, but I didn't know how. So I began to use the design thinking approach. Now, what I want to submit to you here is just a model. It doesn't have to be design thinking. You can submit your stories through any model. What I do want you to take away today is that they need to be designed, not just told. Story lording is the designing. And so whether it's design thinking or any other model that you find best suitable for you and your audience, submit it through this process so that you can see the actual cycle of content, of story, of whatever that communication will be, whether it is an email, it's a chat, it's a text. We are weaving that storyline as audiences, and we're building our own storyline of what the brand is. And so you're driving this at many levels, and you want to make sure you're doing it with intention. So it all means the same thing. It drives the same themes for your audience. So design thinking is what worked for me. And I want to show you these 5 steps. I first learned, obviously, that it starts with empathy. And that was something that, while it made sense in my mind, I didn't know how to practically do that, how to submit empathy, how to lead with empathy. In fact, I learned I wasn't empathetic as a person personally. And so I dug a little deeper, and I learned, first of all, that there's 3 levels of empathy that I will show in a minute. But beginning with the idea that every story has a universal truth, has a theme that we can all attest to as humans. Basically, has something that it delivers to an audience. It doesn't matter where the audience comes from, doesn't matter the cohort, the age, the gender, they all attest to this universal truth. An example of this is Microsoft. The Microsoft mission became 6 years ago to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. Now, this mission, the active word here, the universal truth word here is empowerment. Empowerment is our word, is what we go do. And it's also a feeling, right? So if you look at the bottom, it says, what feeling is your story going to spark? I don't have to explain empowerment to anyone here. I can just say, Microsoft exists to empower. Our story empowers other people. And whether that's empowering a 12-year-old Xbox player or a 45-year-old IT pro, we're empowering. That is our story, what the story is about. Now, the stories may look different to different audiences, but the theme of the story is empowerment, and the feeling is empowerment. So think about your own stories. Whether it's a personal brand and you're going out there, ask yourself, what am I going to spark to the audience when I show up as a brand? Think about individual brands. Think about influencers. Think about YouTubers. They have a brand, and they've created a feeling that they deliver every single time. And that's what you attain to. Same thing with companies that have been successful in the market. They've created a feeling, and that's what they're known for. Not the product, by the way. It's actually the feeling they create. So I learned that there are 3 levels of empathy. That's where we begin. So I want to encourage you to think about your own levels of empathy. How do you drive this with your content in the market? The first empathy is level. A level is cognitive empathy. And this is basically the high level empathy that reminds us that our audience is human. And so we move away from this idea of being a customer, a client, a partner, an end user, and really think of them merely as humans and leveling ourselves off from that perspective. If you're coming from a personal brand, if you're coming from a corporate brand, you just level off with your audience in recognition that they're human. What this does is it enables us as content drivers to deliver that content with empathy, and really enables us to look bigger, to zoom out of ourselves, and really understand the environment of what's happening. A good example of that is today during COVID-19. A lot of brands have shifted their messaging. They have pivoted their services. They've offered and extended different services or products in recognition that all of us humans in the human race right now is going and being affected and impacted by a global pandemic. And so no longer can we just throw out content and hope it lands. We really have to be cognizant at the cognitive level of this human factor. And the more that we do that, the more we understand how empathy works in our content, how we stop and say, okay, how will this land with my humans? Where are they today? How are they feeling today? Will this be the best content that I can deliver to them today? And why? Second level is emotional empathy. And this type of empathy enables the brand, whether it's, again, personal or corporate, to show up human. So not only is my audience human, the brand's human, right? And so I show up not perfect. I show up with flaws. I show up not at my best, and that's okay. And we're seeing that more and more today. I did a research for about three to 4 months called On Obvious Trends for my book. And I learned 12 ideas. Basically, they become trends that people don't think are happening, and then they all of a sudden they become trends. And the trends really led the same themes, the same categories around how the next generation is looking at brands. And there's a lot of disruption in the space of relationship between the brand and the consumer. But overall, there's an extension of themselves that they see. So Gen Z, Gen Alpha are looking at brands, at companies, and before they even consider the product, and before they even think about buying the product, they're looking at what the brand stands for, the stance of the brand. What is their voice? What is their political stance, for example? That's the thing today. And so if they don't agree with the brand's core values, for example, or their story, or they don't know the story, they may bypass it. Even if the product is a great product, they may not even buy it. So think about what the stance is. What is the story that you're driving? What is that emotional empathy that you're driving when you're showing up as a human? The brand has a story, right? The brand was built one day, it was created, it was born. It has an origin story. It grew, hopefully. It has friends and foes. It exists for a reason. There's a mission behind it. Have you been telling it? Does your customer know this? Does your audience consistently, are they reminded of this by you showing up human and telling that story? The last one is compassionate empathy. This one is a deeper level look at how you show up to your customers and how you show up to your audience as a human in general. Now, the practice here truly is a very introspective look, recognizing how you're feeling. That's it. That's it. And you don't have to tell people that. You just have to give yourself time. And it's a good practice, especially these days, to show up human and be like, hey, today, you know what? Not good. I'm not at my best today. That's okay. It's okay to not be okay. But recognition of that enables practice around empathy, and then you can actually practice the rest of the levels and become authentic in your content, because we've all been exposed to inauthentic content, right? It sounds good on paper, it looks like it's emotional, really isn't, doesn't land. So by practicing compassion and empathy, you personally, individually, wherever you sit at the brand, whatever environment and whatever ecosystem you are, if you practice this day in, day out, it's actually a soft skill you can hone in. Empathy is, you begin to lead with empathy, and so your content begins to lead with empathy too. So that's it. That's basically the first step. It's empathize. It's really understanding that experience that you drive with your content. That's story lording. It's not just, I'm going to create content because I think it looks good. I studied my audience and this is the demographic, so good. No, it's actually thinking through that experience. What is the story doing for your audience? And then step 2 is to define. So basically, you get to, now that you've empathized with your audience, you've understood yourself, you've understood the audience, where they sit, the environment, you've zoomed in and zoomed out, then you think about these elements that I talked about. So the audience, the character, the plot, and the conclusion, how they play into this content that you're creating. So again, all of this is really a design approach. It's being intentional, setting an intention to what's happening out there. And what we've done, and what I did personally at Microsoft, and also with my personal brand, is I gave my stories missions. Right, so the brand has a mission, but my story does too. Every time I write a story, the story is going to go do something, right? It's going to accomplish something. Whether it's a call to action, whether it's it's to inspire, to learn, to educate, whatever that will be. Give your story, your content, a mission every single time. Dedicate it to your audience. Your audience could be hybrid, but every time you actually put that down, you're reminding yourself the audience is human. Who am I dedicating the story to? What is it going to go help them do? What do you want the story to do for your audience again? And then finally, what is it going to make them feel? Because Once again, you can write the best stories. If it doesn't make them feel anything, they won't remember it. In fact, they're only going to remember how you made them feel with the story. That's what's going to keep them coming back. The great storyteller Maya Angelou said it best. People will remember not what you said, not what you did, but how you made them feel. So that's the truth here. Again, think about the stories that you love. Think about the poetry. The songs are truly the ones that make you feel something, evoke that emotion. So consistently ask yourself always, am I evoking that emotion from my audience? And the step 3 is ideation. So you get to actually brainstorm some ideas around your stories. Again, somebody invented the hero's journey. You can invent yours. There's many different structures. There's the mountain, the monomyth. There's the petal structure. Can you start with the climax? Can you start with the conclusion? I don't know. You may know. You get to ideate this. You get to try different ways. So what you see here is a acronym that I use a whole lot in my storytelling. It's called SCAMPER, and I submit my stories through this all the time. I ask myself, hey, can I substitute something in the story? What if I added? What if I reversed? What if I adapted or modified something? What happens every time I give my story layers and intersectionality? I give myself permission to not have the final idea. Even though I thought my idea was pretty good, it may not be. If I add more things, if I bring other people, other thought processes into my story, I may look at different layers, and the story will take a life of its own. That is story lording. That is alchemy. It's turning this into worlds that take a life of its own. That's ideation. So in the ideation phase, basically, it's a brainstorming session that you will have with your audience. I'm sorry, with your stakeholders, and think about bringing people from all over the place. Say, hey, I have this story. I want to ideate ways to make it better. I want to ideate ways to elevate it. I want to make sure it lands better. We did this at Microsoft. We continue doing it, by the way. We take samples of our audiences and we say, hey, we have a story that we're working on. We're kind of baking right now. What do you think about this? And we ideate with people that are actually part of our audience. And then guess what? It works because our own audience told us what was going to work or not, right? So it's just basically giving them what they wanted. So ideally, you're going to take time to create those concepts and say, where do I stand in this story? You see here in the character, I have a Robin and a Batman. This is what Microsoft, we decided we were no longer the hero in a story. We used to be. Our PC was, our product was. And for many years it worked. It worked for a lot of years. And then the Amazons and the Googles of the world came, right? And the Facebooks, and we had to think differently. And so 6 years ago, our CEO decided, hey, you know what? We're no longer the hero in our story. We're kind of the sidekick of the hero. We're kind of the Robin to the Batman. It's what I call the Robin to the Batman effect. And we are enablers. We empower the hero. The hero is the customer. We're going to be customer obsessed. What does that look like to you? Who is your customer? Who are you in the story for your customer? The reality is, if the customer doesn't see themselves in the story, they check out. They check out. And that's what happens to all of us. If we don't find ourselves in a book, if we don't find ourselves in a film, we check out because that's not about us. We want it to be about us. So make the stories about you. Ideate ways about your customer. Ideate ways that they see themselves in the story. They get to prototype, right? So the idea around design thinking is that the stories are never baked, not fully grown. They're just ideas. They're story concepts that you get to test in the market, that you get to kind of play and see where they sit. Are they land? Am I going the right way with this ideation? Are we headed the right direction here with our storytelling schemes and techniques? Prototypes are everything from a quick film, a quick video, to a blog, to a white paper. It could be anything, depending on who your audience is. You submit these ideas and say, okay, I created 4, 5 prototypes. Let's go test them in the market. Let's put them out there and see what happens. And what you do is you actually think about, when you test them, did it evoke the emotion that you wanted from your audience? Did it do that? Back to that feeling. Did it make them feel something? And the reality is that if it did, they will respond, because that's what we do as humans. That's when stories go viral. It's when we emotionally attach the story. We can understand it from an emotional level. If it doesn't, they won't respond. In fact, the 2 metrics that you can always think about is engagement, reach, and engagement. Organically, your audience will reach and they will engage with your content if it's good, if it touches them in the best way. So stories will always have that theme around what does it make them feel? What is the ultimate idea around your story? Even though the content can be anything. Again, for me, it was actually generic content around digital transformation, AI, and data. But I was able to tell stories about our own engineers that were struggling with putting our data from on premises to the cloud. There were things they went through. There were bumps and bruises along the way. So we told those stories. We were able to actually become vulnerable in our space. And then if you figure that other IT pros were also being vulnerable, they were also struggling with the same things. And so the beautiful thing about humanizing ourselves in content is that we all find ourselves in the same place. Again, the stories that we're seeing for COVID-19, they're poignant because we're all feeling the same things. We're feeling anger, we're feeling apprehension, we're feeling tiredness, we're feeling sick. So these things unite us as humans. And so what unites your content to your audience at the human level? Alchemy truly is about being customer obsessed. And the best way that I can tell you to become customer obsessed is bring the customer chair in your storytelling. When you're ideating, literally bring a chair and pretend your customer is right there. How would the story change? What would you do different if the customer is telling you how the best stories are told? If they're considering and thinking and giving you feedback, you should know your customer enough to understand that. And if you don't, then take time to do that. Take time to get to know them at a level that they can give you that feedback. Create groups. We've done it where you have samples, like as I said, of your customer. Be customer obsessed in your storytelling, because if the story is not about them, they will not tune in. Simple as that. You can have the best stories, you can have the best products, they will not tune in. Practice is your offensive weapon. So there's so many different things that are coming at you from a storytelling perspective. Everybody is competing for time. Everybody's getting out there to try to get your customers' time, and so are you. And so the best way to actually be offensive and not just defensive in this battle is really by practicing your storytelling techniques. It's creating space to be more creative. The more you do, the better you get, the more ideas that come to you. But this takes practice. It's not just one time in one size fits all. This is a continuous approach. Our channels keep changing, our customer keeps changing, our story keeps changing. It's a constant evolution. So it would be futile to think, oh, I have a great story, it's I'm going to go with this and that's it. That's only the beginning. So be thinking about that every single time. Build an army of storytellers, right? And so wherever you are in your space individually, where can you bring diversity of thought to enable conversations around the story that you're creating? Where can people come in and say, hey, Miri, you probably forgot this, or you should consider that, or you should think about this? The more you bring these power brains to the table, the more you'll know and you understand that story has so many intersectional layers that you can consider. And that's you can submit it to Scamper again and again. So becoming an alchemist, right, is transformation. You transform yourself in the process, you transform the customer in the process, transform the words into worlds, because now you're creating a space where these characters are coming alive. And you're actually being flexible enough that the story takes a life of its own. That's alchemy. You don't just say, okay, I think I have a story, I'm going to just put it out there, hope it lands, right? And because I know the story persona, the customer persona, that's no longer working. Right? Again, we're learning that there's an interaction, there's a relationship that customers want to have at a very personal level with brands. And if you don't offer that through story, then you won't be able to deliver the best product and the best content. So remember, if it doesn't have a character, a plot, and a conclusion, it's definitely not a story. So it has to have all three for it to be construed as a story. But the reality is that beyond that, it needs to be emotional, because a story could be a really boring story, could be an inconsequential story. You want a story to land the best way. You want a story to evoke emotion. You want people to feel something when you land that story, whoever they are. Stories are for your audience, not to them. And that means that you take time, again, to be empathetic, to drive authenticity. You take time to look at yourself and practice emotional empathy and compassionate empathy with yourself so that it becomes part of who you are. And I can tell you personally, I think I have become more empathetic than I was 3 years ago when I started this practice. It is a practice, and we all get good at the things that we practice, right? So I definitely was not a good storyteller at all. I wasn't even a storyteller before, and I became one. You can become one, and you can become an empath, and you can lead with empathy and authenticity. The stories can be really good on paper, as I said, but if they're not empathetic and authentic in nature, they won't land. Spend time ideating. There's I typically take Friday, a couple of hours on Fridays, a lunch hour, to just ideate, to let my brain play, right? I do mind tools, I do mind mapping, and just spark that, that ingenuity, that curiosity, bring myself to out of that, robot mode, the autopilot, and get myself to be creative again. And that enables different ideas, things that I didn't consider before, giving my stories more life and more shelf life as well. And lastly, do it with heart, right? So again, stories that work are stories that are emotional in nature. Emotional doesn't mean you're going to make somebody cry. What it means is that you're enabling a feeling beyond the content, that you're being intentional to say, this is what I want them to walk away with. I want them to walk away feeling this, whether it's inspiration, whether it's knowledge, whatever it is. You're setting an intention and you're designing with that intention. So do it with heart. That's something that we can definitely smell out the fake from content that just doesn't land well. Just, you're like, oh, I don't know, it doesn't feel right, because we can feel that, right? And especially today in the digital age, there's automation, there's robots, there's a lot of disruption and nuances around our content, all fighting for the same audience, for time. And so the one content that robots can't create is the authenticity of the heart. So lead with that. Let yourself drive content that is authentic and emotional, because you'll be leading with empathy. And with that, I do want to allow some questions, as I promised in the end. I know that we have some time for that. So let me do that now.
Okay. Wow, that was inspiring. Thank you so, so much, Miri. Now, I see that it takes some extra time for the audience to submit questions, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to act on it and ask you a few of myself.
Okay, let's go.
So, I'm going to use this rare opportunity to ask you about the intersection between product management and
Okay,
storytelling. Okay, now
sure.
one of the challenges I usually see is sometimes product managers think that the aspect of the storytelling and the brand and the words and the feelings that come with the product
Yeah,
are more of the marketing team's effort, right? We're
yeah,
keeping for someone else to
yeah.
do the job, either because we don't want to step where we don't need to, or
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes people think this is not our trade to do. So, can you share with us a little more about the intersection of storytelling, product management, and everything that has to do with the both combined?
That is one of the best questions I've gotten, by the way. And yeah, that's a great question. Here's where the intersectionality is. It's actually the beginning of story. At the product level, at the product design level, product managers have the privilege, really the honor, to create the product at the design level and to actually think with empathy, or maybe not, about how the product will land. They actually build the beginning of that product story, essentially the brand story in the end. And so let's think about a product that possibly was not delivered with empathy, was created without empathy. A car. A car was probably designed by a man and tested for men. And so when you think about the actual machine that it is, women, people like me, even though they represent 50% of the users, we get into a car and we have to actually push ourselves all the way up to the steering wheel, because the car is actually built for the size of typically a man. And when you think about the test crash, that they do them on a dummy that is probably the size of a man, pretty big. And that means that when the design for the crash, for the airbag to deploy at a certain time, once that impact is made, there's a specific time that this thing is going to come out, right, to protect you from hitting yourself in the wheel. Now, I am pretty small size, and most women, and they're small people, won't actually fit that model. So when you come into the car, you actually push your way all the way in, and you're closer to the steering wheel. So if there's impact, chances are that deployment won't happen at the time to actually save me from hitting myself in the wheel. I'll probably hit it first before it comes out. That's product design without empathy, right? 50% of that audience is like smaller, but we don't design it that way. And so think about that at every level for every product. A lot of people get to design products, that's a privilege, but if we don't insert that empathy of our audience, of that humanity, then we miss out on the delivery of what that represents for everyone else that's getting to use that product. And so storytelling really is a culture activator. It's a design thinking approach at the design level. It's a user experience approach at the design level. That empathy practice enables us to really think through, once again, those layers of how that's going to land with the audience, not at the story level. The product becomes part of the story, right? The product is the story in essence. So where does it sit at the beginning, at the stage of design? It's the question you have to ask yourself. And so you can use the same concept to think about how empathetic can I become to my audience, eventually being able to let the product speak for itself in the story because we've designed it with empathy. More and more as technologies are taking over, as you see algorithms and AI making their own assertions, it'll get harder for us to control, if you will, that intelligence that's automated. So if we don't do that at the beginning stages, if we don't insert that at the beginning, it has the potential to really take a life of its own without the empathy level, and we can't even imagine what can happen there. So there are some things to consider in when we think about storytelling. Story really is the story of our humanity. It really is a story about our authenticity. So how do we deliver that at the product stage from a product management perspective?
I love it. I love everything about it, but I especially love the fact that you remind everyone that storytelling is not like a band-aid. It's not that you create a product, then
Yeah.
you get to understand that you weren't as connected to the user or the customer as you should, and then you build a story on top of that. No, it's something that has to be there from day one. This is
That's right.
such an amazing, amazing reminder. Thank you very much just for that,
Well,
but for everything else that you mentioned as well. And we have a
thank
good
you.
question
Okay.
from the audience. So Deepthi, I hope I pronounced the name correctly, saying, thank you, that was awesome. Agree, that is awesome. As product managers, at what points do you leverage these techniques beside when you're developing product features? Marketing is probably a given. But yeah, I agree with Deepthi because I think it's also an opportunity for us to talk about how we do storytelling within the team.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so I would thank you. So when you, let's say you've designed a product and now, it's going to go to market, you've included your marketing team, you're going to go, you have a campaign. At this level, there's this understanding that the product is going to land somewhere once it's created, and the story will actually take a life of its own. Customers are going to talk about it. You don't have that narrative anymore. You don't own it. You own the product, and then the product is out there, and so people are going to have their own stories about it. So the storytelling piece there is considering all of those different scenarios that may be, and how you're going to counter the story and consistently tell what the story was about and the actual theme of the story. So again, it's a risky idea to think I'm going to create a product and then a marketing is going to go tell about the product, and then people are just going to take it and go, oh, that's great. The reality is that's not true, especially now with the newer generations. There's a lot of criticism, there's a lot of skepticism, and so the product may look good, may be good, the features may be great. Even when you do an update on the features themselves, and you want to go out and tell it and just be excited about it. Again, the empathy teaches us to understand what may not be, and so consider what that would look like if it's not. What is the different narratives that may take place, and how do you deliver that differently, or how do you counter that, or how do you consistently tell what the story was about? So you have to really be, as a product designer, you have to be really have a strong conviction of why the product exists, so you can tell it time and time again, even if it doesn't land the best way. The best way I can tell you this is social networks. People that created social networks, that's a product. The product really created itself. I mean, once the social networks out there, Facebook and Twitter, it's taken a life of its own. When you talk about the founders of these platforms, probably they'll tell you they didn't anticipate what happened with the networks and the life that it took of its own. So it has its own narrative as a product. But if they go back consistently to say this was the intention of the product, this is what we want it to be, this is why we created it. It continuously reminds those active characters of the why, the theme of the story, if you will, and the feeling. It brings them back. That's why feeling is important, because as I talk about, for example, the products on Microsoft, we exist to empower. If that's consistently the theme as we create new products, and people will know, okay, Microsoft empower. It's it's here to empower me. I may not feel empowered right away as a user, but they're here to do that. That was their why. And so you continue back to that intention as a product manager, and it drives away, it keeps you away from the narrative changing so far from what you intended at the beginning.
I love it. And as you said before, a little earlier, designing a feeling or creating the path towards the user has a certain feeling. It's not
Yeah.
about making them cry, right? It's just the
No.
designing of the design of an experience, of
The
having
experience.
like something minded of how you want your users to feel when you're just starting to build this thing that one day will be called a product.
That's right. It's actually, for product managers, I will say it's the product persona. So the product persona is the personality of the product. How does it land in the market? What story does it tell? If it could speak, what would it say? Really, that's what it is. So when you, as a designer, as a product manager, you could see the process of the design. Then you have to ask yourself, when it comes out to the market, what story is it telling by itself before marketing even gets involved, right? It's speaking by itself. So what is it that it's telling people? How is it making them feel?
I love it. I love it. And it leads us to the following question. Is there an intersection between design thinking and prioritization of features? So, can we actually use storytelling into understanding what should we tackle first?
Yeah, absolutely. The ideation phase is probably the best one to actually help you understand that piece. I have a quick practical tool that I use. It's called the napkin pitch. It's actually a napkin. You take a napkin and you open it up. It has 4 quadrants, and ask yourself those 4 questions. The first one is why. Why are we creating, like, sometimes as product managers, we're always like, okay, I know why, and then we get deeper into the product, like, oh man, I forgot my why. Like, why are we really doing this, right? Go back to that. Remind yourself the actual mission of why that product was ideated to begin with. We can lose ourselves, and we know very much that in the product design phases, it changes. Like, the product and the mission do change depending on what we're delivering and the audiences and the stakeholders. We know that. But if we always go back to the why, we stay authentic to the story mission, to the product story mission in the story persona. So that's the first one. The second one is, how does it benefit my stakeholders? And so the why is not the same as the how. It's how is it going to benefit them? I have my why, and the product tells that story. Do they get that? When it goes out in the market, is it an immediate thing, or do they have to think about it a little bit, right? And so if they have to think about it a little bit, then it's not front and center. It's not really telling the story right away. So you have to think about that. The other one is, how viable is it, right? So it's the product when it comes out. Is it really viable? Do they have to go through iterations? Is it immediately a solution to the customer the way that I had envisioned it at the design phase? It's an immediate solution. If not, again, think about that. Think about what the storyline will be, because you can come out with that product and people go, oh, that looks really good, but it doesn't serve me in my space. It just doesn't serve me right now. Maybe I'll wait for 2.0, right? And so now people are going, oh man, I thought it was gonna. So is it viable? And the last one is, again, what is the mission? So the why, and then back to the mission. If does it tie back to the overall company? Is it doing what the company set out to do? Is the product represented in the company? So those are things you have to think about, and you should think about when you're initiating ideation for stories in your product.
Wise, wise words. Thank you very much for that. Moving on to the next question. Thanks for the amazing session. Indeed, really loved it. We all in a B2B space. Pratush is asking, at times we need to control the narrative during the initial adoption phase for any product. How should we approach such scenarios? This is an interesting one, but
Yeah,
B2B is one of your biggest,
it is.
domains. So
It is. It is. So the beautiful thing about psychology around storytelling is that you control the narrative, the initial mission of the story, by telling it consistently to your customers. So B2B or B2C, doesn't really matter. B2B is actually interesting because from a provider perspective or partnership perspective, they need to feel that they're also part of the story, that they come from the same angle. The care, you need to basically define how they serve in the story, who they are, how they play in the brand narrative, and they're going to have their own story, right? You have yours and they have theirs. So how do they come together? How do you fuse them? And so one thing that happens in the psychology of storytelling is, if you're able to brand the story in a certain way, basically position it in a certain way for 3 months consistently, people begin to tune into that. And so I did this test for my personal brand. I began to talk about ice cream on my social channels just to see how people responded. Just talk how much I love ice cream. Ice cream is my superfood. Ice cream, ice cream, ice cream, ice cream, right? And within a few weeks, people were actually sending me content, tagging me on a new flavor that came out for Ben and Jerry, saying, "Hey, Miri, I was at an ice cream shop. I thought of you. Here's a picture of the ice cream I was eating." So what was happening is they were associating ice cream with my brand, right? It was just what happened. So that's basically branding. So the way you do that with your B2B customers is consistently telling your why. We exist because of this. This is the story mission. This is the story mission. This is the story mission. And so no matter what happens from there, the product itself attaches to that mission. So you're consistently driving that. And what happens is your partner or your customer is going to tie back to that mission all the time and basically talk about it, talk through it, and enable it the same way. Basically, they're going to basically become your partner in the storytelling narrative, and they're going to have their own. Again, everybody has their own. The customer has their own. The narrative won't be able to be controlled from every angle, but what you do control is the actual mission of the story. As I said at the beginning, you get to do that. You get to set the intention for the story. What is it going to go do? What is it going to make people feel? And with those two things, you can basically drive the rest of it. Even if the narrative, and it should, evolves in some other way, it always ties back to the mission and the theme of the story.
And what may be the most important word you just used, and this is something you're saying throughout the whole session, is constantly, right? We can't change the message that we're talking about, every season or any new product that we launch, and we do it constantly, as you mentioned. This is when it becomes something that people can trust you with.
That's right. That's right.
Loving it. Loving it. Thank you so much. And the next question is, hi, Miri. It's Shay. Awesome presentation. That's true. That's true. What can I say? How can I drive a good story so I can engage different stakeholders where each of them has a different point of interest?
Yeah, hi Shay. Thank you for connecting. So same thing that I mentioned earlier, right? So Microsoft has a breadth of customers globally, and so we serve 12-year-old Xbox players, and we also serve IT pros, at a different level that are creating products for on premises to the cloud, digital transformation. So there's so much that we serve in terms of customer base, but the story theme is also always the same. So what you need to do is create that story theme. For us, the theme is empowerment, which is also the feeling. That's that universal truth I talked about. So ask yourself, what is that theme that I want to drive across my hybrid audience? The stories are going to look different. They should, because when you connect with a 12-year-old Xbox player, that story is going to look different. But ultimately, it ties back to the theme of empowerment. The question really you're asking yourself is, how do I empower my 12-year-old customer versus how do I empower my 45-year-old IT pro or dev, right? So, and that's how you look at it. You'd actually draw out in the ideation, in the defining phase, you have characters. So you're going to play out and list out who those characters are, who your audience is, where they live, what's the ecosystem. And then the theme is basically trickling down in different areas and in different ways. And each of those should have different story missions. So you will have different stories, you have one theme.
Love it. And it's so practical. Paula has the next question, and she's asking a very interesting one. Which is the weight of visual support in storytelling, and does it change depending on product cycle phase?
Yeah, it's a great question. Ideation phase helps you visualize different angles, the intersectionality of story. The weight of visual support really depends on not only the products, but the stakeholders. So every time we design a product, every time we manage a product cycle, we're consistently thinking about the breadth of the stakeholders that are involved in this cycle, right? So, and they change. We know that the cycle changes, and sometimes we end up with a different audience altogether. So you have to, that's why empathy is important in this idea of storytelling, because you have to be consistently thinking about, is it still working? Is the initial idea still working? Is the visuals that I was thinking about still working when I'm showcasing some parts of the product that I want to show visually in my storytelling? Visual elements are actually what I call magic in story, but they can also deter from the storyline if we don't deliver them in the best way. So it's really back to ideation. You say, okay, right now the product is here. Let's again consider the stakeholder environment. What serves them best today? and it may be completely different. I mean, think about all the products that were supposed to be launched during COVID, right? Everything changed, right? And nothing changed from the product perspective, but everything changed in the environment. That's where empathy comes in. What visuals do you deliver when everything changes? And it will continue to change. We evolve, the customer evolves, the channels evolve, global pandemics happen, and that's where empathy serves us to really look back and go, okay, here was a why, right? This is what we started with, and here's where we need to be now, and what is that narrative? And ultimately, again, does it serve the theme of the story? Ultimately, does it serve the mission? So be and give yourself grace, right? Empathy. Be compassionate with yourself about those visuals that you're going to use that may look a certain way now, but may not serve when you're actually ready to deliver that to the customer. Ask yourself and submit the questions over and over. Do the scampering and see what the layers are to be able to deliver which visuals, because the product can have so many. And as you said, the weight of it could be large, or it could be small, it could be light, it could have so many different alternatives to what you want to showcase. It really depends on your audience, where they are at the moment. The product will always be the product. What you showcase about the product will be different depending on what your audience finds themselves.
So, if I may rephrase what you're saying, we have to stick with the values, but the assembly of that, like the specific words or visuals, may change with the
Features.
time.
Yeah, it's basically what you're trying to showcase will differ. You get to pick those features of the product that you want, and it's really depending on why you're going to choose that based on where your audience finds themselves today.
I love it. Okay, so Sajad, and I again hope I pronounced the name correctly, has an interesting question, but I want to tweak it a little. Okay,
Okay.
so
Okay.
when we're launching a new product, okay, and we're doing, or even before we're launching it, when just we are in the ideation phase
Yeah.
for one reason or another, we do some market research.
Correct.
So what is the part of market research when we're talking about storytelling? Like, let's say you're now working with Microsoft, we will continue with the theme, on a
Yeah.
new product, right? So at what stage, and it goes back to what you said before about the ideation and other elements, but what is like the exact stage of when we're saying to everyone in the room, guys, hold it, we need to add one more component to this research that we are doing, and we are adding storytelling? When is it?
Yeah, I will say on obvious trends will probably be the one, because market analysis, there's a breadth of that you can always find and you can always research. And there's always case studies done on market analysis and telling you what the trends are in general and what we can, predictions around market and what to expect, predictions about technology and where it's going. And that really enables us to think, futuristically of how that's going to land in what environment. But the reality is, we don't stop to think about the things that are not obvious. And so that's where we miss opportunities on things that are not obvious. And so I learned in my own space to think about what is not obvious, and those are called unobvious trends. There's actually a system that this researcher called Rohit Bhakrava. I'll put it on the chat later. But he is like, if you look up unobvious trends, he actually coined the term, and he creates an entire method of ideating, of finding ideas that to us were not obvious at the moment, but as we submit the product in a market, we did not consider some things that may or may not happen, and as we consider them, they actually elevate to trends that will and could happen. So one of those things that for me worked 3 years ago was empathy. And of course, I was talking about this and nobody was thinking about it. Nobody cared. We didn't have a global pandemic. We didn't have the talks about social injustice that we're having today in the world. Now everybody's talking about it. But it was unobvious back then. It is obvious today. So staying ahead of the curve in your market analysis is not only looking at whoever's analyzing the market today and thinking these are the trends that are driving the next thing. The reality is there's a lot of trends that happen that the customer is driving that we don't know yet. Right, they are driving a lot of behaviors in the market and the new generations, and we don't see them yet. We can predict them, but we don't see them. So take them in and consider them, and begin to really dig deeper into what that can turn into and the possibilities. That's really being futuristic, and when you think about product design.
Love it. And last but not least, from Sima, who is saying, love it. Thanks for this session. Every word of this session are at par and can't agree more. That's great comment here. And she's asking, storytelling, how do you introduce a character, keep the motivations throughout the team, and ensure to deal all conflicts to set a priority? And do you use any strategic framework?
Yeah, I
That's a
do.
big
So
one.
that's a big one. So thank you for that great question. And I will put the name of Rohit in the chat when I'm done here with this question. So Seema, thank you for asking. The first thing that we understand about people being passionate about a product or even story is that they see themselves as part of it, as a character, as an active character. So bringing people with you in the journey, it's about listing those characters and considering them and their voices, wherever they are in the product design phase, in the product marketing phase, in the product phase, all of it, right? As product managers, you see the whole cycle and all of the stakeholders, internal and external. So how can they become active characters in the story? Literally listing them and saying, this person is this character, they're in this category, they're driving the product this way, it's driving the theme and the story this way. And that way, they feel part of it and they feel emotionally attached to and engaged to the storyline because they are part of it. So that's the first piece of that. The second one, in terms of framework, it's really around brainstorming tools. So one of the things that I love to do is actually create a space, an open space for diverse perspectives and diverse thoughts, and have people just come in and share those thoughts and really just consider, just like no judgments on. We're not creating, we're not finding solutions, we're not solving anything. We're just sharing perspective, and that really enables an idea in a phase of like ideation where you didn't consider a lot of people, what people were thinking through this whole process, and you could see the different perspectives and the different layers of this product design piece or the product management piece, where they are and how they see it. All of us are consuming the process differently. We're taking it differently. We're living the experience differently. So when you enable the space, the framework really is an open space, an open mic idea where everybody gets to share just that. And you'll be able to see just what incredible things come out of these sessions, just the listening sessions, active listening sessions alone. One of the things that we do is check-ins. So basically, it's not, again, there's no solutions. We're not going to find solutions in these sessions. It's just literally listening. The check-ins are asking 3 questions. How are you feeling? What is distracting you, and how can I help? And that alone, it just enables so much, and it gives insight as a product manager as well, of where everybody's seeing and thinking on the process in the whole cycle of where they are. So it's a very insightful way to also, bring them along in the journey, make them feel part of that journey, so that they can also feel part of the character of the story, and they are passionate about it because they are part of it. So.
They are part of it. Yeah, as you said. So please make sure to include them in. And don't worry, the guys in the comments and Tiba, I hope I pronounced the name correctly. We will include all the names after the session. Thank you very much for being so involved and energized about the content and want to take part. Now, Miri, may I challenge you?
You can challenge me. I'm good. I'm good for challenge.
Perfect. So we are product professionals, and as so we know that it's much about prioritization, right?
Yeah.
Choosing what to do first. So I'm going to ask you to prioritize and choose one of the things that we mentioned today that we've learned from you. So everyone, when they open their eyes tomorrow morning, setting themselves into a new day of work, one thing that you want everyone in the audience to keep in mind tomorrow morning when it comes to storytelling and everything that has to do with the intersection of storytelling and product management. And I will give you some time to think, because I want to remind everyone in the audience that we want to stay in touch with you. So please make sure to like this video, to like our page and channel, so you'll be notified about special and awesome future events like this one. So please make sure to do that. We want to stay in touch with you. And Miri, if to choose from all the fantastic content that you just share with us today, one thing for everyone in the audience, all product managers, to both remember and act on, it's not just about remember it, tomorrow morning to set their product to better success.
Yes, empathy. Lead with empathy, become an empath. It's a process that we all can hone into. When you look at LinkedIn trends, by the way, the 2020 trends, companies and employees are like, the one theme is across employers and employees, empathy. Companies want empathetic employees. Employees want empathetic companies. It's driving our market. It's driving our products. We can have great products if we're not empathetic with our customers and with ourselves. We won't be able to drive authentic product management and releases to our users. So practice empathy, become an empath. We all can. I have. Not completely. I'm working on it, but I can. I'm certainly more empathetic than I was 3 years ago. I can tell you that. So if I can, you can.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Guys, this
Thank
was
you.
Miri Rodriguez and Liggers. Please make sure to check out her book, Brand Storytelling. If you liked this session, you'll fall in love with the book. So, Miri, thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you.
Can't wait for the next time you're going to be on this exact stage with us, sharing more of your wisdom with our community. And to everyone in the audience, have a fantastic day. Bye bye.